Dr. Fandy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, since my colleague talked about a little more about Al-Qaeda, I will submit my full testimony to the record, and I'm going to just basically fill in some of what I think are added information on the testimony. It is very important to, first of all, reverse the popular understanding about Al-Qaeda that bin Laden is the main figure in Al-Qaeda, and focusing on bin Laden puts our efforts in a different trajectory of pursuing Al-Qaeda. In fact, if Osama bin Laden is the chairman of Al-Qaeda, the real CEO of Al-Qaeda organization is Ayman al-Zawahiri. And although my colleague just mentioned to you that an airborne attack was in its inception in Peshawar, in fact, in 1981, as Ayman al-Zawahiri was contemplating the Sadat assassination, he was discussing with his colleague Aboud al-Zumur to use an aeroplane and crash it in the stand of President Sadat. Thus, using planes to target high-level targets was not conceived in Kandahar, but rather on the Nile shores in Cairo. To understand Zawahiri is really key understanding of Al-Qaeda and how it operates. Zawahiri, a man born in Egypt, in southern part of Cairo called Al-Maadi. He was born in 1951. He graduated from medical school in 1974 in Cairo, and joined the jihad movement in 1968 after he graduated from high school to form al-jihad movement. His jihad movement was inspired by the ideas of the founders of the Muslim Brotherhood, mainly the figure of Sayyid Qutb, as well as Abu al-A'la al-Mawdudi. Ayman al-Zawahiri was arrested and kept in prison for 3 years in Egypt, and left Egypt in 1985 for Saudi Arabia, and spent 1 year there working at a Nafis clinic as a doctor, and from there he moved to Peshawar. Some of us are mystified by the name of Al-Qaeda. The origin of the word Al-Qaeda was actually a guest house that was created by Ayman al-Zawahiri with Mr. Azzam, the Palestinian leader of the jihad in Afghanistan. Ayman al-Zawahiri and his jihad movement coming from Egypt started Al-Qaeda guest house. The other group, which also came from Egypt, the Islamic group, started another house called Al-Ansar, the supporters of Al-Qaeda. Their main umbrella sponsors in that neighborhood in Peshawar and Pakistan and Afghanistan was represented by 3 figures, mainly Qalbuddin Hikmatyar, who represents also the branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that takes us back to the ideological trajectory of Al-Qaeda, as well as Abdurrabb Rasul Sayyaf, who was also protecting the Islamic group members who were coming again from Egypt via Jeddah, as well as the Taliban and Mullah Omar, who sponsored bin Laden and Zawahiri. But to understand all of this, we cannot just focus on the technical aspect of Al-Qaeda. We have to look at Al-Qaeda in its broader context in the Muslim world. Al-Qaeda hangs in a web of relations in the Muslim world. Unless it's understood, we miss the whole point of Al-Qaeda. Not to waste your time, I'm going to draw broader implications and some policy recommendations. Since September 11th, on balance, I can say we have won the war against the formal structure of Al-Qaeda, its organization, its military capacity, and its financial networks. This progress has been helped greatly by recent attacks on Riyadh on May 12th. In fact, if Al-Qaeda shot itself in the foot on September 11th, it shot itself in the head on May 12th in Saudi Arabia, because practically it dried the whole financial support and allowed the Saudi state to start an all-out war on these groups, because basically the threat is coming home. Although we seem to understand the formal structure of Al-Qaeda, we have yet to grasp the broader context and the forces that make such organizations appealing to many people in the Muslim world, from which Al-Qaeda and its affiliate organizations draw their support and new recruits. One central area that we need to examine, and it's very important, is the area of ideas and look at the media in the Arab and Muslim world. The culture of terrorism is not a sentiment, it's an industry. It is easy enough to identify individuals and governments who finance newspapers, TV stations that promote extremist ideas. But the media developed even by many moderate leaders of states and media organizations in the Arab and Muslim world. Even Americans' friends have failed to take a clear stand in terms of their relationship with Al-Qaeda. This is both in terms of how they present their ideas in the media and how they deal with those who disseminate an actively radical branch of Islam. The financial aspects of the media have to be reconsidered and studied more in depth. In many Arab newspapers and TV programs, bin Laden can appear as a hero, and even if Al-Qaeda is not named, its ideas and its mission is being supported. This speaks in Qatar's Al Jazeera and the Lebanese channels, and Al-Isbu' in Cairo, who recently called praised whoever puts a bullet in the heart of any American. Currently, many governments in the Arab and Muslim world are happy with the new division of labor, where the media is for bin Laden and his affiliate organizations, and state powers is for the traditional elite. Thus, President Bush's question posed after September 11th, are you with us or against us, has not been answered throughout the Muslim world. We need to have a balance sheet and wait for these answers from every government in the region. Terrorism in the Muslim world can be drawn as a triangle between 3 points: states that harbor terrorists, terrorists themselves, and finally the Islamic movements that provide the pool of recruits and intellectual drive and justification for acts of terrorism. The current policy addresses 2 elements of this triangle: terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and states that harbor terrorists. It has failed, however, to adequately understand the nature of the third component of the triangle of terror, and it's important. In fact, movements to be ahead of states in the Middle East. At least the trend points to the primacy of these movements in the Arab world, and we see Hezbollah is much more important than the government of Hariri in Lebanon. We see Hamas is much more important than Arafat, and all of that. The threat represented by these movements cause loss of focus in the fight against terrorism for the U.S. and for governments in the Arab and Muslim world. It is clear that the U.S. and its allies are determined to attack terrorism from above by searching out planners and perpetrators of terrorist actions and drying up their financial resources. But we have to keep in mind that these movements are part and parcel of broad social tendencies. They represent a major obstacle for any long-term strategy to simply attack terrorism from above. If the incubators of terrorist organizations are to be done away with, we have to allow and encourage alternative movements to take root. More civically and democratically minded ideas have to show that they can have a broader appeal. This requires the cooperation of Muslim and Arab governments, but also attention to broad spectrum of social issues. Currently, governments and societies in the Muslim world are under attack. Governments in particular are alarmed by the magnitude of this threat, but they are not always sure whether they compromise or confront these organizations. Some government recently came to understand the magnitude of the threat. In fact, Prince Nayef of Saudi Arabia finally admitted that the Muslim Brotherhood is the mother of all problems in the Arab world. And Saudi Arabia hosted the Muslim Brotherhood during the Arab Cold War that was between Nasser and King Faisal in the 70s. And in fact, the Muslim Brotherhood, one can argue that it hijacked the total educational Saudi system and turned it around to produce what we know as Al-Qaeda. The Muslim Brotherhood was the first Islamic organization with global reach, in fact. With its headquarters now next to CENTCOM in Qatar under Sheikh Qaradawi, practically the Muslim Brotherhood has global reach. It has offices in Germany, it has offices in Virginia next door, it has offices in Yemen and other places. So unless we really consider the Muslim Brotherhood as part of that larger network, we fail to understand this whole organization. The Muslim Brotherhood is responsible for the civil war in Algeria, responsible for the civil war in Yemen, and responsible for the current situation that we see in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia. Just practically, one has, before we make any clear policy about terrorism, we have to understand that triangle. It is states that harbor terrorists. It is organizations that conduct these acts. It is movements that support and legitimate these acts and make them look good and look attractive in the eyes of other Muslims. And at the center of this, all of this, is what we call moderate Islamic movements that in fact engaged since 1928 as the inception of the Muslim Brotherhood in secret wars throughout the Arab world. We have to understand also that the Arab and Muslim world are going through a civil war, and we have to decide what position should we take on this Islamic civil war. This civil war starts from the home, from two brothers and sisters fighting over the cover, the headdress and the cover, and jihad, to the whole society at large. It's very fundamental. At the fundamental issues and the core of the Muslim world, we have to have a clear position on where do we stand there. Without addressing the third component of terror triangle, the war on terrorism will lose its momentum. The US and the world cannot afford this. A constant stand on the Muslim Brotherhood and all movements that provide support for Al-Qaeda-like activities is key to developing an effective way of addressing the rise of terrorism in the Muslim world. It does not make sense to target the branch of the Muslim Brotherhood known as Hamas in the Palestinian territories and leave it in Cairo and in Yemen and other places. We have to have a consistent stand on these movements. To stand as bystander also on the civil war in the Muslim world is to expect the next generation of Al-Qaeda with deadlier weapons and devastating consequences for the United States of America. Thank you.